podcast. My name is John Patton. I have an amazing guest with me, as per usual. As you guys know, we don't ever have shitty guests on here. We always have great guests. And this week is no different. But first, I got to give a shout out to Vertex. Go to vertx.com, use the code TGC, get yourself a discount on their bags, their clothing, etc. They make some of my favorite bags in the industry. I use them every single time I travel, every day, even for the backpack. The code is TGC over at vertx.com. Okay, and we are joined this week by a good buddy of mine. His name is Travis White, and Travis is the CEO of FRAC. I'm going to try this again. Last time I didn't get this 100%. It's Firearms Regulatory Accountability Coalition. Is that right?
Yes.
Thanks. Good.
Thanks for having me on, John.
Dude, I'm pumped. We got to hang out a little bit in Iowa. And the most important thing that we're going to be talking about is this victory that I'm claiming you guys kicked the shit out of the ATF. Talk to me about give me the high level of what just happened.
Sure. So FRAC has, I'm sure most of your viewers have some awareness, but FRAC had a lawsuit or has a lawsuit pending against the ATF over the brace rule. And we were pending what's known as interlocutory appeal in front of the Eighth Circuit, and that's an immediate appeal. So we're not at final. We're not at final judgment, but it's critical because it measures a lot of the same things that will ultimately be measured on final judgment. Right. So it's a way to get an early appraisal from the circuit court in the process of them reviewing the denial of preliminary injunction. That's, I guess, sort of a practical way to look at it.
So I read part of it, and what I took away from it is that the Eighth Circuit basically said your case is likely to win on the merits, and therefore they're going to hand that back down to the district court. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So what we need to do is paint a picture here, because this brace thing has been going on. I mean, we've heard so many different things going on with the pistol braces for a long time. Let's rewind back to this rule that ATF, the latest rule. About when did that happen? How long ago was that now?
That was like the beginning of 2023 that the brace rule came out. Okay. And then people had till, I want to say, like May of 2023 to comply with it, basically.
And that was like, turn them in or pay $200 because, we think these are now suddenly SBRs, even though they weren't previously, correct?
Correct. Okay. I mean, there was a few more options in the rule. They had like a number of options for various entities and stuff, but basically, for the everyday consumer, it came down to like take the brace off, turn the gun in, and surrender it or register it. Was basically for SOTs. There was a couple other options, but
or the other ingredient is crime and just not complying with that nonsense, because we all knew when that dropped. Everybody knew, despite the massive amount of comments that the public filed with them. Because do you remember how many it was? It was a lot. I know that.
It was like well into the six figures, I think.
Yeah, it was one of the highest that I've ever seen, and it's all like, it is all valid, and the original idea with the brace was for helping disabled veterans and this and that. And, Alex is a friend of ours. He invented this thing to help people. And here comes ATF going, oh, no. You're using this how we don't like. So you're now a criminal. And all these hundreds of thousands and millions of braces out there, they're all suddenly illegal based on a whim of ours. And, the comments came down. Everybody said, no way, this isn't cool. ATF went ahead with it anyway, because that's what they were going to do. They don't care what we actually think. And then the lawsuits came out. Where did that get? Like, how many? I think there was like 5 or 6 at first, something like that.
Yeah, there was a number of them. I've kind of lost count. Most of them were in Texas. Ours was up in North Dakota.
Okay.
I believe there was one in Florida, and then I believe there was one out in Virginia. But the ones that really took ground were the ones in Texas, and then now as well as ours. in North Dakota.
Okay. So your case in North Dakota to me stands out, one, because it's in a different arena, a different circuit, and the what do you call it, co-plaintiffs, I guess, the people that are supporting you,
Mm-hmm.
It's bigger than just FRAC. Who all is on this damn case? Because it's a lot.
Yeah, so it's FRAC. Obviously, we're the named plaintiff, the first one in line, and then we've got 25 states. We have BNT USA, SB Tactical, and a guy named Rick Cicero, who's the leading instructor for adaptive shooting. And he's actually, there's a picture of him in the ruling here from the Eighth Circuit.
That's got to be, he's got to hang that shit on the wall. Like I would definitely put that on the wall. Like, look at me, I'm famous. I mean, I was pretty proud to know that we had a clip. I don't even know if it ended up in like the final documentation, but I know the Supreme Court watched Adam and I demonstrating the bump stock stuff. So that was pretty cool. So to be in a picture in there, yeah, that's cool. So 25 states, are these, generally speaking, are they all like Republican run states? Is that the idea?
I would say the power structure in those states probably skew more conservative. Yeah.
That's that is a softball way to answer that. Yes, they absolutely are leaning that direction. So you've got 25 states, you've got SB Tactical, BNT, you guys, and Rick Cicero. And what was like the basis for the complaint against ATF? Because there was all, I mean, the case was huge. So can you give me like the highlights of what you sued on?
So we went under the Administrative Procedures Act, and the main thing was the APA with an argument that the rule is arbitrary and capricious. Basically, just means absurd in legal terms. It doesn't have a rational connection with rational rulemaking. So and there's one key thing I want to point out, and I don't mean to put the cart before the horse here, but this rule has already been vacated down in Texas. Now that's still open on direct review. I've heard that the government may have filed their appeal today in the Fifth Circuit.
Oh shit.
But with ours going parallel to that, there's a different, generally speaking, the ones in Texas, many of those cases rested on logical outgrowth tests, basically meaning the final rule was not a logical outgrowth or really a logical extension of the proposed rule. Ours rested on directly challenging the underlying factors with the brace rule. And our appeal here, the ruling we just got, the court looked at the actual factors that the ATF used, and they also looked at the example, I guess, annex that was attached to the rule that had pictures of several pistols with braces on them. And they specifically ruled that I don't want to call it an enactment, but that document from ATF, that sort of agency action, was also improper. So that's so I would to distinguish our ruling here from the ones in Texas. The Texas ones came first and they got a victory, and that's awesome. But ours, I think, was a very thorough victory in terms of the court analyzing deeper into things and striking it down on that deeper level.
So I want to try and understand what the APA challenge, this arbitrary and capricious thing. How the hell does that work? Because I don't fully understand. Like, are you challenging the way they made the rule? Is that it? Like, are you saying no, you're not even allowed to make a rule like this? Is that the idea?
Well, I don't want to misspeak here. So it's you're talking substance versus form, right? And
sure, yeah,
right. So I would say that ours is very much looking at the substance.
I see.
And not exclusively in Texas, but a lot of the cases down there, a lot of the arguments argue things like logical outgrowth, which unfortunately looks at form. Was the final rule a logical extension of the proposed rule, right? That's in many ways that's a form thing, right? It's like it goes to the formality of whether or not what the final rule, if it matches up close enough to the proposed rule, whereas ours looks at the substance of the final rule and says this is arbitrary, like this doesn't make any sense. There's nothing that the law-abiding consumer, taxpayer, citizen can look at and draw rational conclusions from to know, the NFA tax status. And that's also what we're talking about, is tax status of a given firearm, right?
Yeah, the nonsense that they were perpetrating with that, like, oh well, it's magically different even though it looks the same. That you can't expect people to know that, and they have no way of notifying everybody or educating them all.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's two of them here that the Eighth Circuit specifically called out, like the marketing and community use factors, right?
Explain that.
There's sort of this vague thing that ATF had in their rule about how they would look at literature, basically, or basically third-party statements, right? So if you had a pistol in your possession that had a brace on it, they would sort of look at, I don't know, like a brace whisperer, right? They would look at what was said by third parties about that brace in determining whether or not the brace was a buttstock or a brace.
Wait, I mean, so like, okay, so I possess the brace and the company said this is a brace, but somebody else says it's a stock, and they were ruling using that. They were trying to.
Well, the third party. I mean, the third party could be the ATF. The ATF third party reference, whether it's marketing, community use factors, right? That could be a true third party, like a YouTuber, or it could be. Okay. It could be a distributor, manufacturer, retailer, or whatnot, potentially. It was so vague that it's hard to even know, like, who's the constrained source of these statements. And also, if you're a consumer and you have something and you have a certain understanding of this thing and you use it according to your understanding in a way that's legal, and then they say, well, this other entity or this other person said, no, that's this, to then put that onto you, right? That doesn't seem very just.
That's fucking confusing.
Yeah. So the Eighth Circuit didn't like it either, needless to say.
Right.
And I would encourage folks to read the ruling. They also
make sure there's a link in the description of this when we're done.
Yeah, and they also have here several products in the back where in the end of the ruling that they specifically said, again, the ATF had posted this annex to their rule that had like examples of braced guns that
Are you able to screen share?
I have it up. Let me see. I don't know. How do I do that on here?
I don't know. We're learning together. There's a button at the bottom of my screen that says start screen share.
How about I email this to you real quick, John, and then you can screen share it.
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the fun parts of my job is that now I have to deal with both YouTube and Rumble and Facebook and all these other places just to get some damn content out to you guys. And I hope, most of you guys that are out there watching on Rumble are following both the Gun Collective and the Gun Collective podcast, because, we've got two. And I think a lot of people forget that we actually do a podcast. Let me know when you send that. Let's see if it actually comes through. Yeah, we've been trying, and YouTube recently changed this. You'll appreciate this. YouTube recently educated a bunch of people, and essentially you can no longer have a call to action in the promotions on a given video. So for example, on YouTube, I can no longer say a .com portion of a firearms manufacturer website. Can't say that anymore. Not even if it's not even in the context of promotions. I just cannot mention it. Can't do promo codes. Can't do any of that shit. It's wild. It's absolutely
that is wild.
So which one am I pulling up? Okay, so I'll pull this one up first. Let's make this. Let's embiggen that. Yeah.
And if you go to page 34 of the PDF, that's where the annex, the appendix starts.
Let me see if I can figure out what I'm sharing. I have so many things open. Oh my gosh. Where is it? It just doesn't exist. This is great. This is great content. All right, we're going to skip the screen sharing because I don't know what's going on. So we've got a bunch of images. Can you describe what's in these images? Because that's the only way we're going to be able to do this reasonably.
Sure. Yeah. There's just in the back. It's the same stuff the ATF had. They call it quote common weapon platforms with attached quote stabilizing brace designs that are short-barreled rifles. That's an
And that
ATF.
was just like a whole bunch of different manufacturers' products with braces, and they just called them arbitrarily SBRs, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the court specifically put this in their ruling here and said that's not right either, right? So the point I'm trying to make is the significance of our ruling here is the victory came first in Texas, but our ruling was a more thorough victory insofar as the appellate court now, so law of the case, law of the circuit, has ruled, looking into the rule, that the factors are arbitrary and capricious and therefore unlawful under the APA. And furthermore, the ATS application in the rule itself of these factors or whatnot to these certain guns that were in this appendix, they also ruled that that's invalid.
Wow.
Right? You see what I'm saying? So, and it wasn't just on a form of like logical outgrowth where the end rule didn't close enough match up to the starting rule, proposed rule. This was actually a substantive assessment by the appellate court that what the ATF did here was unlawful.
It's basically like your directions on how you got here were wrong. That's fun. The alarm is going off upstairs. I'm going to shut that off real quick.
Got some unexpected guests or what?
No, that's just somebody going outside without shutting off the alarm. That's what that is. That's always fun. So we have this case where the ATF has been chin checked on the way they got to this sort of they arrived at this rule. And what does this all mean for not just the consumer but the gun industry? I'm seeing more and more brands starting to return to selling braced pistols. What does this mean in general for the industry right now?
I think the significance of it is once we get to a final judgment, having case law now that looked specifically at the substance of what's going on here is going to have a more profound effect, in my opinion, long term.
Okay.
In other words, with the rule getting struck down based on a logical outgrowth thing or whatnot, that would be, it would be good. Obviously, a victory is a victory, but ideally, you want to have a more substantive hit from the court that says you cannot take braced guns and call them SBRs, like at all. Like that's just wrong. And so that's, I believe our ruling stands for that principle.
So does this have implications into other cases at this point, or is there potential for that?
Well, I mean, it's only binding precedent. It is a published ruling, meaning it can be cited more easily, but it is only binding precedent in the Eighth Circuit. Now other circuits can refer to this as what's known as persuasive precedent. Okay. So they could look at it and say, hey, take a look over here, see what they did, right? So that's good. But the key thing is it's in the Eighth Circuit, it's binding. And now another formality when you sue the government, you have multiple plaintiffs and groups of plaintiffs suing the government. They, as a party, it's the way the injunctive relief goes, right? As a party, if they get stuck with an injunction, as long as it applies broadly to that agency or protects a more broad category of people, it doesn't necessarily matter where it arose from, right? So, okay. If the ATF gets an injunction against them as a defendant out of the Eighth Circuit or out of the Fifth Circuit, they got to be sued somewhere, right? The injunction's got to come from somewhere. But once they get enjoined, they are enjoined from doing or whatever. And then, with that, same thing with rule vacatur, right? So right now, a Texas district court has vacated the rule. That has now gone up on appeal, final judgment appeal, back to the Fifth Circuit, who already assessed it on interlocutory appeal, which is what we just went through here in the Eighth Circuit.
Okay.
So it's going up on its final round of appeals now in the Fifth Circuit, and then our case is as I don't want to say a backup, but as a second front, having an additional case pending to hold the government accountable, I think is key.
So we're basically trying to stick it to them. It sounds like the Texas case is kind of just a step ahead in terms of
Mhm.
speed of the case. That's not necessarily a problem for anybody. Um, when do you like so I want to try and understand how this works and forgive my ignorance on this.
Mhm.
So it looks like the Eighth Circuit pushed it back down. So what is the district court required to do now?
Well, I don't want to speak out of turn. I'm going to have to talk. The lawyers are going to also have to make a complicated decision on that.
Okay.
So, I mean, I'm going to have to defer to them on that. Um, because it is complex, right? There's a number of
Right.
potentialities that it could occur down at the district court level. Most of that's going to be a procedural technicality, though, right? Like substantively, the appellate court that binds the district court that we're in, which is North Dakota, the appellate court has ruled in our favor and made substantive legal conclusions in this ruling of theirs that are favorable to our side, right? So that is what it is. Now the procedural formalities of injunctive relief and things like that, that's a separate question, but it's more of a procedural thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure out because what I'm trying to get at is when is the ATF going to get slapped so hard that they stop doing this? When is the fork in the electrical socket too much? How do they stop getting slapped? When do they touch the stove for the last time? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like they are behaving like children with these nonsensical attempts at taking rights from Americans. So how do we get to the point where they stop?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this case represents that in many ways, right? So where they lost not just on a form issue, they didn't lose just by how they went about making the rule. They lost on what the rule is, and I think that our opinion and the precedent that it sets, albeit here in the Eighth Circuit, but nonetheless the precedent that it sets, that's going to have a lasting effect to send a message to the ATF again on substance of what they've done, that they can't do this.
Right. Well, I mean, we've seen, as far as I'm aware, they haven't won a substantial case in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
At least in terms of these rules. There's the FRT, wide open trigger thing that just got vacated, I believe. There's the Texas case, and what the other one is the Vanderock case, which is the 80%er. We were talking about that a little bit. Do you know where that one stands right now? I don't remember.
Yeah, the 80%, the Vanderock case is pending in front of the Supreme Court. They've
Okay,
taken
that's
it.
what it was. Okay.
So that's my understanding. Yeah, they've taken that, and we should be getting our filings prepared as amicus here shortly. So
Right. Okay. So we could have a huge victory, Supreme Court victory. That would be super, super interesting. We're winning on the braces, we're winning on the triggers currently. And it seems like the courts in the US have kind of gotten their shit together and are tired of these just nonsensical ways of regulating the gun industry, gun consumers, etc. Would you agree with that?
yeah, I think the courts are stepping up in a big way to hold this fourth branch of government, the administrative branch, accountable. And I say fourth branch of government tongue in cheek, right? It's not in the Constitution, but yeah, I mean, I think that the courts are doing their job and they're standing up and holding them accountable and looking out for the people.
Which is it's almost refreshing. You would expect
Mhm.
it to be that way based on the founding of our country, but we've gotten away from that.
Mhm. I mean, I think that's really what all this comes down to is without getting into the merits of the NFA, that's its own conversation, right? But the NFA was passed by Congress at least, as opposed to these sort of things that are not passed by Congress. They don't go through a democratic process.
They're
You
not
have
real law.
they're not statutory law. They're not
That's what I'm saying.
congressional
These are not laws. These are arbitrary rules.
rule. They're the regulatory law. They throw the word law in there so that it gives it some sense of authority. But I mean, it's administrative law, it's regulations, and ultimately, it's enactment by executive branch bureaucrats,
Right.
attempting to make their own law for whatever reason.
You know what I find interesting about the whole thing is that they have been weaponized by administration after administration after administration. We first had the 8 years of Obama, then a little bit of relief, thankfully, except for the bump stock thing. And then the puppet administration that is coming to an end finally. They have completely weaponized it, and they have failed time after time after time. Of course, they've murdered a few people along the way, but they've failed as a whole in regulating things that the firearms industry has created that expand our rights in certain ways. Where does FRAC stand on sort of the forthcoming innovations? Because we didn't see braces coming. I don't think anybody saw them. Are you guys looking forward to more of that kind of stuff at this point?
I think so. I mean, I think that it's, both for the sake of the consumer and the sake of our country, you want to have innovation take place, right? Because you never know where it leads to. I mean, it can not only make people's lives better or makes, lawful sporting activities more enjoyable, but you can also make like the defense establishment more, I don't want to say productive, but more capable. More capable is a better way to put it, right?
I would say productive. I like that word.
Yeah.
I think they are not that. So one of the things that we talked about discussing today is this thing called a RAND report. And I am so far out of what the hell. I have no idea what that is. Can you explain what that report is?
Sure. So in July, it was sent to Congress, but it's a Commission on the National Defense Strategy, and it's done by RAND. It's a think tank, basically.
Okay.
And they basically assessed. This is a 132-page PDF. I've got it up right now.
Holy
and,
crap!
Right, and I would encourage people to Google it. RAND report 2024. Right,
I'm sure I can find some links and make sure they're in the description when we're done.
Yeah. And I've sent it out to FRAC members previously, so if you dig back through the emails I've sent out, you can find it. But one of the things, I want to find the exact page here. One of the things that they assess, they have a whole section on the defense industrial base, right? So they're looking at production. Oh, here we go.
So is this like gun company production?
Well, it would be weapons, munitions, like all of it, right? I mean, in my opinion, that would include everything from, planes, helicopters, armored vehicles, machine guns, rifles, uniforms, munitions. It would everything comprehensively that has to be made to equip a military to fight, right?
Holy shit. That's like looking at our capability as a nation, correct?
That's exactly what this was. That's exactly what this document was. So the quote here that really just, I think, hits and it should be a reality check, like a bucket of cold water to the face. And this is their quote, not mine. The quote, the DIB, again, Defense Industrial Base. So the DIB is currently unable to produce the weapons, munitions, and other equipment and software needed to prepare for and engage in great power conflict. That's their first sentence for the Defense Industrial Base and technological innovation section in this document. So, that right there, it should be a wake-up call. And I would hope that, but it seems like this kind of stuff is said every year, right? But we kind of have this latency of like, well, we'll get around to it. But then they want to play politics with the defense industry, with the arms industry, and play petty politics with it without any sort of eye towards what the overall implications of that are, right?
Wow.
Yeah. So there's a book out there.
It's just such a powerful statement. Like, we as a nation are not ready.
Right.
That's really what it boils down to, is we are not ready. If some shit goes sideways, if Canada decides to get a bug up their ass and start pushing south, we're not ready for that.
Yeah. And there's a book out there I'd recommend to folks. It's Freedom's Forge by Arthur L. Herman.
Okay. What's that about?
And I'm actually in the middle of reading it right now, but it's basically about the steps that the American defense industry, the arms industry, right? Not just a compartmentalized defense sector, but like everybody had to go through to stand up our industrial capacity during World War II, and for about a year prior to World War II. And one of the key takeaways from the book, and I was told this by a FRAC member company. One of their chief of operations actually read it and then recommended it to me. One of the key takeaways, though, is that the way we were able to meet that capacity, that extremely high level production capacity as a country, was through the aggregation of small companies that were able to, everybody, pointing in the same direction, right? Working together. So you have, instead of a few massive companies, being able to aggregate all the little companies and dish out the work orders and the production and all that, get it all organized and aggregate all that as part of the industrial base. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah. So for example, the sort of custom makers of ARs, trying to speak to what the gun industry is specifically. So these small AR companies or small pistol companies, they would all be given work orders and could potentially be making the exact same products on their machines to help deal with the war efforts that were forthcoming. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. So again, I mean, I think last time I was on your show, we talked about the importance of unity of purpose, unity of effort, everybody pointing in the same direction. That's a prime example of people pointing in the same direction. And, you do have laws out there like the Defense Production Act and stuff that can be used to help, I guess, mandate or organize to who's making what. But the key thing is that the aggregation of small businesses into a large production force played a huge role in our ability to meet the task at hand and have a good outcome, that we all enjoy now, right? Winning World War II. So, I think that, seeing books like that and then seeing this report from the Rand, for Congress, I think that's, and then looking at the world, right, as it stands right now, I think that at some point there needs to be sort of a moment where the powers that be, wake up and say, what can we do to work with the industry to your point, towards innovation, towards production capacity? What can we do to have that relationship instead of having, I think for the last 4 years, things take more of a relationship characterized by animus.
I would suggest that we are, like the past 20 years, having a sort of the animus relationship, this sort of nonsense where the government is fighting the gun industry for no apparent reason, based on emotion. I feel like that's, and I can't speak to the entirety of the defense industry because I do not understand what those companies may be up against. But what I find fascinating is that speaking on the gun industry, we've gone up, we've gone down, we've gone up, we've gone down. Companies have upsized, downsized, all these sorts of things. And not once has the government sort of applauded any of it. They've never once, at least to my knowledge, supported it, with the exception of contracts for specific things like ally, weapon production, our own weapon production, things like that. So I sit there and I wonder, well, what the hell does that look like when, Daddy Warbucks comes around and says, hey, to give an example, Palmetto State Armory, who is a member of FRAC, hey, your whole production needs to go to producing X, Y, and Z for this effort. You're no longer allowed to sell products, in the same capacity. What does that look like for consumers when that happens? That's like that adds so much complexity to what we currently have as a gun market. What do you think your membership is ready for something like that, or would it just completely upend their businesses?
I guess I don't want to speak out of turn on that. I mean, I think that, I have faith that, American industry would rise to the occasion, right? So
yeah, we'd like to hope so, of course.
Right. I mean, necessity is the mother of all invention, and crisis is the father of reinvention. Right. So,
I never heard that second part. I like that.
Yeah, I made that up. I mean, I don't.
I fucking t-shirt.
I don't know if I heard it somewhere or whatever, but I'm like, it's stuck in my mind, right? Like it just makes sense, right?
Right.
So, I think that I look at both sides of it, right? And I think it's critical that the firearms industry that subsect of our overall defense industry that has a civilian role to make sure that consumers have access to everything they need to exercise their Second Amendment rights. That's a critical function, and we want to make sure that that is protected and continues, and they have access to innovation and the ability to engage in innovation unhampered by bureaucratic red tape. But on the same token, let's not kid ourselves. Their ability to function in the event that there's a crisis, they would then step up, almost like a reservist in the military would step up and be called up, right? Our industry, our gun companies, right? That small gun company that makes barrels or whatnot, right? They would step up and be aggregated into an overall defense industry, just like World War II. That's what happened, right? I mean, you had companies that didn't even make gun parts getting aggregated into part of the overall defense effort, right? So,
was it Singer? Wasn't it the sewing machine company?
Yeah, they made like 45s, I think, right?
I think they made 45s. I know there's like some Garands that had unique production, just like stuff that you didn't expect to see. The names on the tops of these receivers, like, whoa, everybody was making guns.
Yep. So
that would just be fascinating.
And so I think that's where it really irks me a bit when I see, reality checks like this document that's square, and I'm sure Rand has access to way more data and research or whatever than I do at my fingertips, right? So when I see their conclusion being so bleak, and then I see these sort of naive and, as you point out, emotion-based attacks on our industry coming from, certain parts of the powers that be, right? Yeah. Attacking the industry, it just strikes me as a really dangerous, really naive thing to do. And then you look at the way the world is now. It's not like we're like floating in space where the only issues are internal. Like there's a whole world outside of our borders that appears to be getting more dangerous by the day, right? So, it's disappointing ultimately.
What do you think our biggest weakness is as a nation when you look at our capacity? Do you think it's the political sort of ideologies of like, oh, I won't make guns, that is a bigger issue than our capacity? I mean, obviously the Rand report says in general, we're not ready. And they, I'm sure, back it up with some really good data. But I want Travis's opinion. This doesn't have to be a FRAC opinion. I want your opinion on where are we at our weakest in this.
Well, in terms of, I guess, two things I'd point out, and it's no secret. This is, you can Google this, right? Like I found this out just from sort of word of mouth and Google. But some of the subcomponent materials like gun cotton, the stuff you make, the subcomponents for like munitions powder, there's some bottlenecking in terms of the sourcing of that stuff. And I think that's a huge thing, because if you want to scale something up, you obviously need to be able to scale up your production of the raw source components.
And a lot of those components we get from outside sources, particularly Eastern Europe, which is fucked. I guess,
Well, I mean, regardless of the the first thing is, regardless of how good it is or bad it is, the fact that you have to get something from overseas at all, like there's a vulnerability that comes with that, right? It's like there's now you have to then bring something to your shores to then make it into another thing to send it back out. Obviously, blockades, naval vulnerabilities, whatever, right? So that's, that subcomponent shortage, I think, is the first thing I'll point out. The second thing I'll point out is, even with laws, ultimately words on paper, like the Defense Production Act, right? You can go to somebody and say, you're now going to make this thing. And this other, right?
It's your responsibility.
But telling somebody to make something and them actually being able to make it, they're not the same thing. Like I could tell you, like, I'm, the whatever authority, and you John will make this thing. You will make 1,000 rifles a day for me, and you're like, give me a genie in a bottle, man. Like from what, right? So that's the other shortage that I think concerns me is, do we have enough skilled machinists? Do we have enough of the machinery? Again, that ground level machining capacity. And I don't just mean consolidated in big companies. I'm talking about
like
in general, like if you were to aggregate, if by some blessing we were able to come up with common sense, ways to organize, the production pool of all the little gun companies and say, hey, we need everybody, get together. Do we have enough of those little companies? Do we have enough machines, skilled machinists, all these things? Because a lot of that comes down to trades,
Right.
Trades, people that know how to do things.
Yeah, and
Right.
I suppose when you look at our capacity in that way, it's terrifying. Because we rely so much on overseas componentry of everything.
Mm-hmm.
Everything we build comes from, has these, like you said, subcomponents that come from overseas, whether it's the raw materials or, sub assemblies or whatever. Sure, it might be assembled here in the US, but a lot of that stuff comes from Asia or, other places. It's staggering to think if we had to go fight somebody, or if somebody came here to fight us on large scale, what the fuck that would look like. There's always we as gun owners love to talk about, a rifle behind every blade of grass, because it's a powerful statement. But even then, I'm not sure, based on, we have no idea what the conflict would be or how it would be fought. But you have to go, well, the future looks different in the Ukraine right now. Their warfare looks a lot different than small arms warfare. I mean, sure, that's involved, but it looks different. And we are not producing drones in mass quantity here in the US, right?
Well, and that's another thing I've noticed from just looking at footage from Ukraine. And I don't know where the little handheld drones are made. I'm assuming some of them. Yeah. So
Largely in China, but like we don't know specifically where those are being made.
Right. And so I don't want to speculate. I don't want to over speculate. However, I think it's a safe bet to say very generally that we are not self-sufficient in producing, drones on our shores. Right.
Right.
And we've seen them used, those cheap ones, right? Cheap drones used in mass quantities in places like Ukraine, and how that's changed the nature of warfare and tactics, right at the squad level even. Right. So again, back to the original point though, with innovation, you want to have that protected. You want to have that actually valued by the powers that be, by the executive branch, the president, the Congress, all, legislative branch, all of it. You want it to have value, be respected, be appreciated. Hey, there's innovation taking place. Don't be short-sighted, right? It's a short-sighted move to go after the firearms industry for cheap political, points, at the expense of, the bigger picture, the longer term picture of the critical role that our industry plays as a subsect of our, basically like a reservist in our overall defense capacity as a country.
When I think about what that would look like socially, all I see is just this unraveling of the left-sided extremists, I'll call them. This sort of unraveling, because not only are we going, in that instance, if we needed to spool all that up, we would be fighting a war, which, I am not huge on war personally to begin with, but then you bring in these people that are absolutely straight up lunatics, and we're going to war. That's a problem for them. Not only that, but we're producing more firearms than we currently do, which is a problem for them. We're arming more people in the US than we ever have. That's a huge problem. And I look at that and I go, these people will just unravel at their seams. Mm-hmm. They will not have any clue how to operate. What do you think? What do you think happens when society starts to? Because that creates more division, right? Like what happens then?
Well, I want to make one point real quick. I agree with you. I'm a veteran. FRAC's a veteran-run organization. I pulled a tour in Iraq and another tour in Afghanistan. Not a big fan of war, but I will tell you, if you're gonna fight, the rule is to win. You feel me? So it's like that, and that's where they say, tactics determine battles, logistics determine campaigns. And industrial capacity determines wars.
Wow.
Right.
That's another t-shirt right there.
Yeah. But seriously though, like, you need all three. You got to have good tacticians, you got to have good logisticians, but you got to have a solid industry for all of that to rest on. And so, when I see this Rand report, I mean, I would hope that this is getting some attention in Congress. I'm not overly optimistic about that, but I would hope that, the assessment. And again, this is not just some random think tank spitting out a document. This was a congressionally commissioned report that they gave to Congress. So, I would hope that it's getting some traction and resonating with some folks. If they're on both sides of the aisle, this should not be a partisan issue, and that we could have, at least remove any degree of animus between the industry and the regulators. I mean, I think that we should get to a place where we can just have an open dialogue, and when they have concerns on something, they can take a reasonable approach instead of this sort of zero tolerance thing they've got going right now, where they just look for any excuse possible to pull an FFL and really pull the carpet out from a company without any eye towards what have you missed out on now, right? Like, what would that company and the people involved have come up with down the road? I mean, there's a time and a place where maybe a company has really crossed some hard red lines, right? But for the most part, most companies, all the companies I deal with, everybody's trying to do the right thing. Everybody's trying to do the right thing, but there's so many rules and it's so complicated. And then you factor in that we're human beings, we're not perfect. And yet the ATF comes across with their zero tolerance policy and says you have to be perfect. Right? Humans aren't perfect, but you have to be perfect if you're in the gun, right? Well, that's not possible, right? Humans are not perfect, even if they work in the gun industry. We're not perfect. So, I would hope that we would, get to a point where the industry and the regulators could have a more reasonable interaction.
Do you think this growth of the defense industry base, do you think that involves the government subsidizing stuff to sort of reinforce it?
I don't know if we need to get to the point of subsidy. Well, obviously, if there was an actual,
if we were at war, of course they would.
Right.
But leading to that, do you think that's required?
I mean, I think that there may be some pinpoint places where they may have to subsidize certain things, and it might even go to like things like making sure people are making gun cotton here in the States, right, as opposed to having to, or making steel, right? These are things that transcend the gun industry itself, right? But I think the first step is to get rid of all the negative things, right? So
deregulate.
Right. The rule, smooth over the rough spots, make things more efficient, make processing times faster, have that. I mean, and before you do all of that, just have an open, productive dialogue with the industry.
It sounds like a fairy tale to think of ATF and the United States government as being efficient and having open dialogue with anybody. It sounds fake. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't even sound possible right now.
And I think that one of the you got to look at incentive structures. You have to establish the correct incentive structures. And I think one of the things that we need to do, again, knowing that the firearms industry is sort of a reservist of sorts for our overall defense capacity, you want to establish an incentive structure with regulators like the ATF that says we're gonna hold we, the federal government, are going to hold ATF accountable, for production capacity. So yeah, you have to regulate. You may regulate the industry, but you do not get to wipe if you go in and cause havoc. You can't just wipe your hands of it and say, "Well, that part's not my problem."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Create the incentive structure where when there's production issues, they have to come answer for any role they may have had in causing those production issues.
I would love to see a point where ATF has any accountability for the amount of financial burden that they have put on both consumers and the gun industry as a whole. When I think of this pistol brace issue, to circle back to what we started with, you think of the financial burden of, I mean, the millions and millions and millions of dollars that were lost and spent both in lost revenue and fighting this bullshit. But I mean, what are they going to get done to them? Absolutely fucking nothing. Nothing will happen to these people.
Yeah, I mean, it had a major financial impact on the industry across the board, right?
Oh, huge. It was massive because it was, you know, in 2018, 2019, you couldn't go anywhere without a pistol brace firearm, whatever variation that was. They were fucking everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
It was on every gun. It was the glue of the industry. And then ATF came in and said, you know what? These are illegal now because we say so, because we're butthurt about some nonsense we heard on the internet. That's really what this boils down to. None of this was based in facts. None of it was based in reality. How do we, how do we hold them accountable? Like, can we, I know tar and feather's not necessarily in style. It's not in vogue right now. What do we do to hold ATF accountable?
Well, I mean, the first thing is you want to have correct oversight, so they can't just act in a sort of a rogue way. You want to have, and this is true of any agency, you want to have oversight. And that would be from Congress, namely, and then as well from higher levels of the executive branch. But then you also want to have some legislation in place that when there is an out of control regulation that gets struck down by the courts, you want to have a lower bar towards getting recovery of legal fees and even damages. Right now, there is a law out there that allows for the recovery of attorney's fees and stuff like costs and fees.
Okay.
But it's a very high bar. Like winning is not good. I won the case. That's not good enough. It's a higher bar than that.
Oh, wow.
So, but then that's just for the cost of litigating. Then you also talk about damages. Well, you have what's known as sovereign immunity. And so the sovereign immunity waivers, they're very narrow in many ways, and they're very compartmentalized. So you want to have a more broader sovereign immunity waiver that would allow for companies to recover economic damages when a rule that has massive impacts like this one gets struck down by the court.
I mean, so here's the thing. Here's the way I look at this. And I totally agree, making that easier for people to recover damages, especially when it's at fault of the United States government. What I would like to see is the individuals responsible for perpetrating that bullshit put in prison. Because if we flip that around, and we're talking about tax dollars, right? We're talking about this. This is a tax that's being imposed on the public and the industry as a whole. So if we look at that and go, okay, a member of the public is tens of millions of dollars deep in tax debt, they would be in fucking prison. But here, these people are just arbitrarily, wiping entire businesses out. And the individuals that are perpetrating this bullshit based on the whim of fucking nothing, they have no responsibility in it. That's what I would love to see change. I would love to see these bastards out there. I can't remember the guys. Merrick Garland, that's step one. Step one, Merrick Garland. Yeah, put him in jail for this kind of bullshit. And everybody at the head of the ATF that was involved in this, put him in fucking jail. That'll change things real fast, just like term limits in Congress. It'll change real fast. Remove the money. I'm sorry. I get very upset. I get very upset, Travis.
It's all good. I'm holding my tongue on this one.
Yeah, I know. You're here in an official capacity, and you have to be less uncouth. I don't know the right word. No. You have to be couth. Is that
try to maintain my composure a little bit on this, but no,
yeah. I will not do such a thing. Fucking tar and feather them all.
I hear your point. I'll say this. I hear your point.
Loud and clear over here, bud. Yeah. It's so frustrating, and I can only imagine the conversations that you've been privy to or had directly with, with Alex from SB Tactical, who has been on my podcast many times over, has talked about these issues many times over. I mean, I've been in Alex's house, and he is like just harboring stress, not because of the implications of like his business is hurting and those sorts of things. He is harboring stress because ATF is ruining people's lives by ruining his business. And he's only one example. That's the part that is just utterly fucked. And I'm watching my friend just harbor all this stress because of this. Now, thankfully, again, to touch on the reason we're talking tonight, you guys have had a good victory. What is the next step for FRAC? What are you guys looking at to the future?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing is we got to see, what happens down in the Fifth Circuit, and then we're going to see how that goes. Mainly procedural stuff at this point. That's the short answer. We have to see sort of the chessboards, how they're going, and ultimately the lawyers will call the shots on that. But we have a great trial team. I mean, our litigation team is great. So there's a lot of complicated stuff going on all over the place. So they're going to keep an eye on the Fifth Circuit, and then our case will be going down on remand back to the District Court in North Dakota, and we'll have to figure out what the appropriate ask is of the District Court at that point.
I suggest, I don't know if there's a legal term for this, but the tar and feather method, that would be what I'm suggesting. I've talked to I believe a couple members of the legal team at this point for FRAC, and sure, I'd love to see that suggested. That'd be neat. Do you think they do that anymore, Travis?
No, I don't think there's a motion to tar and feather anymore. I don't know.
Oh man, wouldn't that be amazing? Yeah. Okay. Well, that's positive. We're in a sort of a little bit of a holding pattern until all this sort of shakes out. Correct?
Exactly. I mean, I think that there's. The first thing to understand is the rule has been vacated. It is vacated out of the District Court in Texas. I want to be clear about that. This rule is vacated. As far as I know, there is no stay in place from the courts down in Texas. So, the rule is vacated, but we are in a procedural sense where, got to keep an eye on what happens down in the Fifth Circuit and let things play out to a final conclusion. So.
I love it, man. I think this is all good news. The Rand report is the opposite of good news, but this fight against the ATF, we've got some good news, and I'm really pumped about it. I appreciate you coming on the show again. We'll have to try and hang out more than just talking this sort of stuff. I'm going to come to North Dakota, and we're going to go shoot a bunch of pheasants or something.
Absolutely, man. Let's do it.
Yeah, we got to do it. What is the website that you want people to check out to learn more about FRAC?
FRACaction.org.
FRAC Action, FRAC Action.org. Go check it out. Of course, support our sponsor, Vertex, VERTX.com. Get yourself a backpack. The Ready Pack is far and away my favorite. I use it every damn day. Literally every day. And I think you should go grab yourself one. They just released some new multicam patterns. If you want to get a discount on some of the stuff over there, use the code TGC. It'll get you at least 15% off. Sometimes they bump it up even more than that. Like I believe this past weekend, it was 28% off. That's amazing. VERTX.com. As always, thank you all for watching. Thanks for checking us out live here on Rumble. And as always, guys, we'll see you next time.